frequently considered by the Sri Lanka Army and Air Force for the academic advancements and international security-related programs. Dr. Vidanagi contributes regularly to electronic and print media, analyzing current global political developments. He is the author of the bi-weekly for being here with us today, accepting our invitation, and I cordially invite Dr. Vidanagi to the stage and chair Defense and Strategic Studies Technical Session 3. Meantime, I would like to call upon our eminent guest speakers, some online in this session. Mr. P. Abhiratna, Mr. Asif Ward, Ms. S.U.V. Jayaratna, Major A.W.S.T. Gunasinghe. Dr. Vidanagi will also introduce the presenters of the session to the audience.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Brigadier Rajapaksa, for that introduction. Distinguished guests, academic staff, cadets, students, panelists, and everybody who's joining us online. It's a great pleasure and privilege always to be part of the KDU IRC and to be a person who's coming into the KDU family. It's always good to do this while in transition. So today's theme is on extremism, and I think as a chair, I can speak for a long time about it, and all of us are part of this conversation. So what we have today are 4 papers which looks at facets of this phenomena. So I don't want to do an elaborate thing on extremism, but what I want to highlight is that the last 2.5 decades, especially since 1998, I always take 1998 as a very interesting cutoff year, because 1998 was the year when Al Qaeda launched 2 simultaneous attacks in Tanzania and Nigeria and Kenya, Nairobi and Dar es Salaam. That's the first time in modern history a terror organization managed to do simultaneous attacks in 2 international locations. So if you look at that particular phenomena, that is in a way the birth of modern global terrorism. Though we talk about terrorism, terrorist organization in the modern world has existed pre-Cold War as well, during the Cold War, and certain organizations such as the Fenian Movement, which some people don't like, which is a precursor to the Northern Irish Republican Army, they have existed in the 19th century as well. But the break Maldives, India, and to a certain extent, certain parts of East Asia. And some people always forget, like last 2 years, the Philippines army was fighting, right? Islamist rebels for months. Cities were under siege. So what we are seeing is the kind of divergence from the great convergence of terrorism which happened in the from 1998 onwards, and that divergence is creating massive impact in regions such as South Asia, East Asia. So that is why I think this particular topic is very important to the larger topic of national security and its holistic approach. For Sri Lanka, we cannot look at a holistic national security now without examining and without taking the fact that there is a phenomena called extremism, and that phenomena called extremism can lead to violent outcomes. Right? That is why we are all here. That is why most of the panelists who are going to speak will speak, because it will definitely have violent outcomes. So how we deal with that, how it is happening globally, how it is happening regionally, how Sri Lanka is the case, these are the facets that we will discuss today in the presentations. So I think that's a sufficient enough start comment from the chair. So I will go to the first speaker. We have 4 speakers, one physically present, but the first speaker is Professor Praveen Abhiratna, whom I've been acquainted with and I consider a friend. He will speak about recruitment rhetoric, especially in a time like this. Last year, we are seeing global, crises one after the other, and now we have a natural security crisis, which is the unfolding COVID-19 outbreak globally, which is having a massive impact on all the security thinking as well as apparatus. So, Professor Abhiratna, I'll speak a little bit about him. He's a professor of counterterrorism studies at the Henley Putnam School of Strategic Studies, National American University. Right. He has over 15 years of academic experience in the counterterrorism field. He also serves as a visiting lecturer at Bandaranaike Center of International Studies. In Sri Lanka, his research interest includes unconventional warfare, international security, and especially the nexus between environmental issues and strategic security, which are all pretty much related to each other. But today he's going to talk to us again. I'll highlight the recruitment rhetoric, how the recruitment rhetoric and the media strategies of the Islamic State and Al Qaeda. So over to you, Praveen.
Thank you, Dr. Vidanake. Can you see my screen? Hello? Hello?
We can hear you, Professor. Please go ahead. We can see you also.
Right. I'm going to share my screen. So just give me a minute. Oh, yeah. Hold on a second. You go on. It's an honor. This is really relevant in relation to my topic, which is related to basically use the global media system in a way that it finds itself a victim of a strategy that it cannot control or fully understand. This is seen in the Islamophobia that has swept the world since 9/11. Essentially, what they are trying to do is to propagate this idea of us against them and how Islam is under attack. And they do this extremely effectively, and we can see the result of that tactic and strategy from the Easter Sunday attacks that Sri Lanka had to endure last year. It fulfilled a strategic objective of provocation, provoking a nation into taking action and reacting in ways that is in population, using primary materials and also analysis of primary materials, in-depth studies of those primary materials from think tanks and other social scientists, individual research work, as well as peer-reviewed publications. And I look at how the propaganda campaigns are designed to have a strategic as well as individual impact to propagate their ideology and inspire action. The paper is organized in a manner that starts from the very foundation of which is their ideology, to show how that ideology is translated into strategy, a strategy that the strategy of their information operations, and how that translates into their recruitment and radicalization activities. And I end by giving some broad recommendations for policy makers to consider. So going straight into it, the recruitment and radicalization of the information operations is looked through a framework of a risk framework of analysis that was developed by Shields and Verhage. And in this, the important part, the two important ones that I focus on are the breeding ground and environmental pull factors. The breeding ground is essentially the structural context of the individual, the structural context which is beyond the control of the individual. So, for example, social, economic, and political elements. So if you think of Sri Lanka, when you have a majority population that seems to be saying, when you have a tiny minority saying it on behalf, so when you have a tiny minority of that or extreme minority of that majority population, looking at Muslims as not being a part of this country, they who are born as Sri Lankans stop to think, if I'm not a Sri Lankan, then who am I? And this is what these Salafi jihadis are trying to give an answer to. Their message is extremely potent, and this is why I have used Muslim countries as examples in explaining how this breeding ground is created and exploited by the information operations of the Salafi jihadi groups. The individual push factors are mainly to do with psychological characteristics of the individual, which is difficult to estimate unless you're able to do the study the individual itself. The environmental pull factors are the external factors that would engage in recruitment and radicalization activities. So, for example, Hussein Bosnik is a Bosnian, is an individual who went around to rural areas of Bosnia to recruit individuals to have build personal relationships and convince them into becoming a part of an extremist movement and thereby become violent extremists. But Hussein Bosnik's activities are important because they resemble that of a name that has become commonly identifiable in Sri Lanka, Zaharan, the leader of the Easter Sunday attacks. Family networks, another characteristic that we saw in the group that conducted the Easter Sunday attacks. Family networks are also something that is exploited and highly exploited and used significantly by these groups in order to recruit and radicalize. So imagine an elder brother or a father that is a part of an extremist group being able to convince his children, his wife, to follow in their footsteps. So it's both obligatory as well as mandatory at times. The information operations of these groups are highly structured. So their ideology translates into their strategy, and the information operations are organized almost with the same, not almost, with the same effort as the military operations themselves are. And what I'm trying to show here is that it also mirrors the military operations. They have units that are specialized to conduct different types of operations, and they also have their field units that think of it as provinces, the regional units, and also the individuals that contribute to this effort, whether they be conducting bombings in the countries that they reside in, or whether they are just sharing raw footage and messages and ideas promoting the group. This is a nicely done diagram showing the actual ISIS media organization with the central media divan at the top, and all the way at the bottom you see the vilayat officers and the media officers in those individual areas. Their content is also carefully, the development of content is carefully curated. They have pre-publication review rooms, publication rooms, and discussion rooms where the bureaucracy would basically discuss and evaluate content. And this content is evaluated extremely carefully.
Praveen,
So
you have 1 more minute to wrap up.
The quality of materials, the graphics, the effects, what scenes are shown, all of these are evaluated and carefully selected before they are shared. Then they're shared through videos, books, magazines, posts, forums, games, and literature. So forums discuss this content, magazines share this content, videos, which are extremely professionally made when they're coming through one of those units. I'm not referring to the individual raw footage, but the professionally developed videos, which are made inspired by Hollywood movies, BBC documentaries, and CNN newscasts. So to grab the attention, to inspire individuals, to educate them, and provide a rational argument. And earlier, I mentioned how the media output is mirrored. The media output and the military media activities and the military activities go together. That's because one of the aspects that they want to do that is the timeliness of their messages are meant to match the ground reality of their military operations, as well as the overall strategy in terms of the message that they want to convey. So the messages are carefully curated and they have a very strong rationale behind them. In terms of games, which I didn't have time to go into in the paper or space to go into the paper, these groups have adapted popular games like Grand Theft Auto, for example, to be more about quote-unquote jihadi activities. In terms of dissemination, we have users who are both users as well as content creators. So they take information directly from ISIS Central or one of their media officers and share it with their followers.
Praveen, please wrap up in 30 seconds.
users, for example, if they download the app Dawn of Glad Tidings, which is developed specifically by ISIS,
Thank you, Praveen. We'll have some of these arguments up at the end of all four papers because of the time limitations, I want directly to go to the speakers. So our next speaker is Mr. Asif Fuad, and he will speak on the drivers of Islamist extremism in Sri Lanka. And he primarily wants to focus on the idea that how his argument is that how we have misunderstood in responding to Islamic extremism in Sri Lanka and how that is creating further challenges. So, we introduce Mr. Fuad. He is a defense analyst and strategic communication specialist. He holds an MSc in strategic security studies degree from the KU. He was previously one of the youngest war correspondents to report the final stages of Sri Lanka's conflict, which concluded in 2009. He has extensively written on topics related to national security, violent extremism, countering terrorism strategy, organized crime, and strategic communications to several leading international and local publications. So, Mr. Fuad, over to you. Yeah, Asif, your mic is muted, so I think you need to unmute.
Hello,
Okay.
can you hear me, sir?
Now we can hear you. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Following last year's Easter Sunday terror attacks, Islamist extremism has become one of the most frequently debated topics within the defense and academic circles. Today, I will be talking about the drivers of Islamist extremism in Sri Lanka.
We lost all the feeds.
Over the years, many security strategists and policymakers across the world have failed to address the drivers of Islamist extremism, misunderstood the enemy, and have misinterpreted their understanding of the global jihadist ideology. Even though the radical religious ideology has been an empowering force, the individual, contextual, and structural drivers of radicalization leading to violent extremism play a significant role in strengthening homegrown and transnational religious violent extremist groups. In order to effectively prevent and counter the Salafi jihadist brand of violent extremism, it is imperative to identify and understand its drivers. I would like to draw your attention to a few key facts related to the rise and evolution of Salafi jihadist extremism in the global context. A superpower nation such as the United States has spent over 5.9 trillion US dollars on the global counterterrorism campaign since 9/11. Despite much resources being allocated to counter jihadist groups across the globe, in 2015, ISIS, Boko Haram, Taliban, and Al Qaeda, which are the top four Salafi jihadist groups, were responsible for over 74% of all terrorism related deaths. according to the Center for Strategic International Studies, there are over 230,000 Salafi jihadist combatants that are spread across 70 countries. Even though there isn't a universally accepted legal definition for violent extremism, we can quite simply define violent extremism as the ideologically motivated violence which is perpetrated to advance one's radical or bigoted political, ideological, or religious objectives. The process of radicalization occurs based on what we call push and pull factors. The push factors are the conditions that are conducive for violent extremism to breed and structural context from which it emerges. The pull factors are the individual motivations and the processes which play a key role in transforming ideas and grievances into violent extremist action. The rise and growth of violent extremist groups have often been defined by catalysts or trigger events which create a space for individuals to turn towards violence. The experience of such catalysts or trigger events, along with a broad socialization process and propaganda, is a key stage in the evolution of a suicide bomber. Social and political trigger events act as catalysts that strengthen the resolve of violent extremist groups to justify their reasons to use violence and recruit combatants for their cause. Many of the catalysts or trigger events often emerge from internal conflicts, political upheavals, social injustices, lack of integration amongst communities, polarization and marginalization amongst communities. And such catalysts or trigger events makes way for radicalization leading to violent extremism. There is quite a few misconceptions and theories related to the origins and evolution of Islamist extremism in Sri Lanka. Islamist extremism in Sri Lanka was a byproduct of 3 decades of conflict. The main reason behind the rise of jihadist militancy in Sri Lanka during the early 1990s was due to the persecution the Muslim population in the north and east had to face in the hands of the LTT that was fighting to carve out a separate state in the region. The Kathankudi mosque massacre, in which 147 Muslim civilians, including children, that were gunned down, and the expulsion of 72,000 Muslims in the north, which were committed by the LTT, were key trigger events which sowed the seeds of Muslim militancy in the east. Eventually, many Sri Lankan preachers, much like Zaharan Qasim, is the leader of the jihadist network that perpetrated the Easter Sunday bombings, began to propagate Wahhabism and were engaged in a process of radicalizing the militants in the east at that time. So these events eventually led to sectarian violence as a result of these jihadist groups under the direction of their Tawheed preachers conducting attacks on the Muslims that did not follow these Wahhabi practices in Kathankudi and the East in particular. So Islamist extremism in Sri Lanka eventually evolved from its former militant roots, with many being influenced by the transnational Salafi jihadist discourse. The drivers of Salafi jihadist extremism in Sri Lanka can be framed within 2 distinct periods that reshaped and redefined jihadist militancy and terrorism in the island. The time frames in which Islamist extremism evolved in the island, which emerged in 2 separate waves, can be categorized as the local sectarian jihadist wave, which was from 1990 to 2010, and the transnational jihadist wave, which was from 2014 up to date. The transnational jihadist wave emerged following the end of the war in 2009 and was reshaped as a result. The local sectarian jihadist wave was emerged following the ethnic cleansing of Muslims by the LTT in 1990 and lasted up until 2010, when in which many of these jihadist militants were disarmed and demobilized. The drivers of these local sectarian jihadist wave are the threat to the Muslim community in the region posed by the LTT, the ethnocentric political influence in the region the goal of maintaining ideological dominance of Wahhabism over other Islamic sects, religious factionalism, sectarian violence, and political repression during the period of conflict. The socio-economic drivers similarly played a crucial role in fueling extremism during this period, since many who were financially affected by war were vulnerable to radicalization. The transnational jihadist wave emerged following the end of the war in 2009 and was reshaped as a result of the actions of ultra-nationalist extremist groups such as Bodu Bala Sena, Mahasun Balakaya, which coincide with the rise of the Islamic State and the call for a global caliphate. The 2018 anti-Muslim riots, which erupted in Ampara and Kandy, was a primary catalyst which led to a renewed momentum of Salafi jihadism in the island. The main drivers of this transnational jihadist wave are the escalation in identity politics, aggressive grassroots propaganda campaigns conducted by Tawhid extremists and Sinhala Buddhist ultranationalist extremist groups such as DBS, renewed ethnocentric and ultranationalistic fervor following the end of the war, the failure to prevent communal riots and protect minority religious communities within the country, polarization amongst communities as a result of growing Islamophobia promoted by right-wing ultranationalist extremist groups, the rise of ISIS and the call for a global caliphate, the regional political influence of former jihadist militants, and the influence of events taking place in the Salafi jihadist realm in the global context. If the drivers of violent extremism are not addressed, Sri Lanka could face the same strategic failures in curtailing all forms of ethnic and religious extremism, which many powerful nations have failed to address. The absence of an inclusive framework which addresses the root causes of extremism has led to many states being ineffective in preventing and countering Islamist extremism. The French philosopher and writer Voltaire once said, "Those who can make you believe in absurdities, make you commit atrocities," are words which resonate even today. Today, we live in a world where fake news and disinformation campaigns disseminated by violent extremist organizations is changing the global security landscape. So Sri Lanka needs to adopt a holistic, multidimensional and integrated approach which addresses the root causes or the drivers of Islamist extremism and should focus on countering Islamist extremism in the ideological, psychological, social and online domains. We need to keep in mind that Islamist extremism is a constantly evolving national and global security threat. And I would like to conclude my presentation by emphasizing on the fact that you cannot defeat tomorrow's Islamist extremists by applying yesterday's strategies.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Asif.
sir.
Thank you, Asif. So we are going on the right track with time and all. So our third speaker is with us, and it's very interesting from Ms. Asif's presentation coming to Ms. Induja's, because I think from a academic analysis to a more practitioner's view on the same similar theme. So Ms. Sinduja Jayaratne's focus is also rethinking the Sri Lankan approach of countering Islamist violent extremism in the context of how violent extremism globally has become more of a peripheral phenomena, and how its impact, especially in our region, is making us really rethink our strategies and what is working, what is not, and what we should look at. So she will enlighten you on that. So let me briefly introduce Ms. Sinduja. Ms. Sinduja Amangi Vikramasinghe Jayaratne is an intelligence analyst, advisor at the Directorate of Military Intelligence Sri Lanka. She is also a PhD candidate at the KDU. She has completed her master's in strategic studies at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, and her BSc is in International Relations in the University of London. She is also a visiting lecturer at the Bandaranaike International Diplomatic Training Institute, the BIDTI, the KDU, and the Bandaranaike Center for International Studies. So, Ms. Sinduja, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Harendra, and good afternoon, everybody. My presentation is based on rethinking the Sri Lankan approach of countering Islamist violent extremism. With the rise of Islamic State, South Asian terrorist groups have been vehemently influenced since many of the terror groups such as Tanzeen Ansar al-Tawheed fi Bilad al-Hind and Tahrik-e-Khilafat Jundullah and many other groups have pledged allegiance to ISIS in 2014 and 2015. Also in 2015, Islamic State of Khorasan province was established in the Afghan-Pak border to enhance the tentacles of ISIS. Besides, many of the South Asian individuals have been stimulated to join as foreign fighters in Syria and Iraq or to conduct homegrown attacks influenced by ISIS ideology. With such development of ISIS in Indian subcontinent, after the demise of it in 2019, ISIS has focused to the Indian subcontinent due to the continuation of violence in the region, which assists to foster new dimensions of terrorist threats in the region. In such context, the nature of the Islamist extremism in Sri Lanka could be defined as a problem which occurred in the periphery, that is the international context, but relates to the core, that is the domestic atmosphere, due to the created fault lines in the local context. Therefore, with the focus of ISIS in South Asia, this research questions the approach of countering Islamist violent extremism in Sri Lanka, highlighting that threat of Islamist extremism and the response from the Sri Lankan security apparatus are mutually exclusive without any correspondence to each other. Hence, this research aims to highlight the importance of a possibly integrated counter-violent extremism approach combining enemy-centric and population-centric strategies to deal with Islamist extremism while comprehending the repercussions mounting from this threat to multicultural and multi-religious societies in Sri Lanka. The Sri Lankan government's approach to countering Islamist extremism before and after the Easter Sunday attack has not been adequate to deal with the growing Islamist extremism in the country. Therefore, there is a lack in identifying core and periphery relationship to the escalating problem of Islamist extremism in the country. Security apparatus have limited to only monitoring the Islamic extremists, instead linking them with the international phenomena. The problem was visualized from the lenses of the ethnic separatism rather than dealing it separately. Also, the repercussions are miscalculated due to the inverse problematization of the issue. As a result of above-mentioned aspects, there is a mismatch between the growing influence of Islamist extremism in Sri Lanka and the approaches of CVE implemented by the Sri Lankan government to contain the problem. This research tries to therefore identify the connection between the growth of Islamist extremism in the periphery to the core, the reason for the expansion of Islamist extremism in Sri Lanka, the gap between identification of center or centers of gravity and CVE approach, finally, the reason for such mismatch in counter approach and the problem of countering Islamist extremism in Sri Lanka. The objectives of the research are to identify the effects of changing international landscape of Islamist extremism to Sri Lankan multicultural and multi-religious society, to identify the actual centers of gravity relating to the problem, also to identify the importance in combining population and enemy-centric approaches in the Sri Lankan CVE approach, and also to and also how to deal with that. The threat of Islamist extremism, Islamic violent extremism, has become more of a global problem due to universalization of the concept of caliphate by different jihadist groups, mainly by ISIS. Since the downfall of ISIS in Syria and Iraq, ISIS has narrated its ideology to instigate lone wolves and thereby make the threat of jihad more fluid than ever. Continuous call upon for jihadists by ISIS to join ongoing battlefields will bring negative impact to all the conflict zones around the world fighting against jihadists, not only terrorists with the threat of ISIS. This is an indication where jihad is becoming globalized rather than confined to one particular organization or group of individuals. As a result, containment of ISIS will be difficult in a fluid jihadi structure with promotion of unusual, innovative attacking styles. The context of jihadism in South Asia has become even more volatile due to the complicated relationship between Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and Islamic State of Khorasan province in Afghanistan. This encouraged potential individuals to either connect to these organizations physically or ideologically. Within such development of jihadism in the region, Sri Lanka is vulnerable to possibility of lone wolf attacks, returning of foreign terrorist fighters, possibility of sectarian clashes, marginalization and growth of silent radicalization, use of Sri Lanka as a transit point by terrorist and transnational organization crime groups, then radicalization in madrasas, finally radicalization of Muslim women. With such vulnerability of Sri Lankan security emerging from escalation of jihadism in the region, it is important to identify whether we have identified the correct center of gravity relating to the problem of Islamist extremism. While the enemy-centric approach identifies leadership of a group as a center of gravity, population-centric approach focuses on strategies which win hearts and minds of the population. Related to these two approaches, there is a misconception of identifying the actual center of gravity in fighting modern terrorism deriving from Islamist extremism. While the center of gravity in modern terrorism appears as ideology and leadership hand in hand, national security forces are only hunting the heads of the leaders of these particular jihadi groups. Therefore, enemy-centric approach in addressing Islamist extremism has not achieved its goal of limiting the expansion of the threat. This depicts that while the terrorists are utilizing a misapproach of paralyzing the enemy and winning the confidence of the Muslim population, the national security forces are only focusing on killing the opponent while leaving them to take patronage among their sympathizers. Therefore, the approach of the enemy and CV approach of the security forces do not connect in equilibrium, since both are driving in opposite directions. This is a universal problem and also applicable to the Sri Lankan context.
You have 1 minute to wrap up.
Okay. The current context of Islamophobia actually, goes with majority and minority in the Sri Lankan context. And here, I actually introduce the cycle of resistance to understand the Sri Lankan context of Islamist extremism and how it deals with the majority. So here what we see is that the unusual fundamentalist practices by both the groups, minority and the majority, are actually creating a fear factor among both the groups and ultimately resisting each other. So, in conclusion, with the changing landscape of Islamist extremism in the periphery, its influence has infiltrated into the core and the counter approaches to the threat is shaped accordingly. However, the problem of Islamist extremism and the counter approach to that problem are mutually exclusive in Sri Lanka. Hence, it is important to re-evaluate the approaches of countering Islamist violent extremism and to see how we can combine the enemy-centric and the population-centric aspect to deal with Islamic extremism. And also, not only about that, when you're dealing with population-centric aspect, we have to think about dealing with both the majority and the minority simultaneously. So this concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sindhuja. So we come to our final presentation. The presentation will be made by Major Surat Gunasinghe. I think it's a collaboration between Major Gunasinghe and Mrs. Kulani Vijayabau, who's a lecturer at the Department of International Relations, University of Colombo. I think this particular paper focuses on it's a case focus. It focuses on extremism as a non-traditional security threat, an analysis on Sri Lankan army infantry battalions and military preparedness to combat extremism. So I think we started with a very macro approach, and then we had two very interesting insights into Sri Lanka in general. Here we have a focus on the Sri Lankan military as armies, infantry, especially armies, infantry battalions preparedness. So that's kind of bringing that kind of a conclusion to the flow. So let me introduce Major Gunasinghe. Major Gunasinghe belongs to the Sri Lanka Army. He enlisted to the Sri Lankan Army on the 10th of January 2004, and he joined with the 20th Battalion of Sri Lanka Singha Regiment. He studied at Dharmaraja College, Kandy. He has obtained his BSc Military Science degree from Sabargama University of Sri Lanka, and he has followed many local and foreign military courses. He is currently enrolled at Defence Services Command and Staff College, Sabukaskanda, where he is following his past staff course. So, Major Gunasinghe, over to you.
Hello, sir.
Yes, Major, you can start.
Surat, please go ahead. We can hear you.
Sir.
Yeah.
Yes. Good afternoon, sir, madam, ladies and gentlemen. I am Major Surat Gunasinghe and belongs to Sri Lanka Singha Regiment. I joined with the army and said year 2004, and I completed 17 years work experiences. But today my topic is extremism as a non-traditional security threat and analysis on Sri Lanka Army infantry battalions, military preparednesses to combat extremism. So that I selected this topic with my experiences of the past war period and the last year, 22nd April, Eastern Sunday attack. I visualize that this combat extremism threat is the next biggest threat which we have to face, which our country is facing presently. So that why I selected this topic as my research study. So as well as being an infantry officer of the Sri Lanka Army, I have understood that the difficulties, barriers which we have to face when the situations arises, the kind of extremism threat, especially the preparedness levels of the infantry battalions, is very low to face this kind of violent extremism trend. So identifying these reasons, I selected this research topic to my studies. So with this, according to the contents, the first I am going to introduce introduction and then literature review and research methodology, data analysis and finding, after that recommendations and conclusion. And when we come to introduction, in the 1848, the Lord Palmerston has stated that the nations have no permanent friends or allies, they only have permanent interests. With that statement, the Lord Palmerston emphasizes that the importance of the country to be vigilant and prepared to the counter not only the current threats from identifying state and non-state actors, but also be prepared to counter the global threats from alliances in order to protect and achieve its own national interest. And by considering the Sri Lanka, the necessity to focus on new extremism threats, we could be undermine its national interest. These threats can be broadly segmented into nuclear, biological, cyber, terrorism, and transnational crimes also. In addition to these common threats, there are a number of new threats methods which influence the national security of our country. So these threats are namely ideologically and internationally network threats, threats from non-state actors, and ethnic and religious issues, and etc. So when we consider about the human security of the world, it is mainly a human rights. It is considered about the human rights. It refers to the security of the people and communities and security of the states. So mainly human security recognizes that there are several dimensions related to the feeling safe, such as freedom from fear, freedom from wants, and freedom from indignity. So when we consider about the human security further, we can categorize it as mainly 7 elements. Those are economic security, food security, health security, environmental security, the personal security, community security, and political security. When evaluating the state security to human security, must consider the non-traditional security issues. These are the challenges to the survival and well-being of the people and the state in the present scenario. So, in present condition, these non-traditional roles are the key activities which are contributed to by army personnel, especially infantry battalion officers and soldiers in the Sri Lanka, because they are the personnel who are going first at any situation arise in the Sri Lanka, so especially the infantry officers and soldiers. So with this introduction, I'm going to background of my study. So as I mentioned earlier, the Sri Lanka faces a number of security threats which could undermine our national interests. In order to ensure substantial long-term peace and prosperity and protect the sovereignty of the country, it is essential for the Sri Lanka army to prepare for mitigate and defeat these threats, and it is essential for Sri Lanka army personnel to have the good, proper theoretical and practical knowledge and training to deal with these emergencies and future threats, because this will directly affect into national interest of the Sri Lanka's peace, sovereignty, and the prosperity. So, as an example, in 1930, in year 1930s, the development of the machinery and the rapid mechanization and development of the Germans directly affected to the defeat of the French military forces. So, during the Second World War, this was highly emphasized. So, when we refer the history, so further, the defeat of the native Red Indians by the United States cavalries, also one example to understand the importance of the military hardware preparedness to face non-traditional security threats, as well as by considering the sophisticated weapons, technologies used by past insurgencies and their activities in the world history. We must need to understand the requirement of the importance of the preparedness level of the Sri Lanka army. So, with this, I have under this topic, I have identified there is a problem to the present security threats faced by the Sri Lanka and the role of the Sri Lanka army with this extremism, combat extremism threat, and how to maintain peace, prosperity, and sovereignty in the in our country with these issues. Importance of the military preparedness to the country and Sri Lanka military preparedness to defeat non-traditional security threats. So these are my research problem which I have identified, and with this I have my research question was why extremism is considered as a non-traditional security threat. So and why extremism exists in Sri Lanka and what is combat extremism. I wanted to empathize this and how combating extremism in other countries influencing to the Sri Lanka. What are the different military methods used by other countries which could be adopted to the Sri Lanka system, because we can refer the world superpower countries who face to the insurgencies, the extremism threat, their method, their technologies, that kind of thing we can adapt. What kind of things we want to follow as a island nation, and what are the recommendations to face combat extremism and threat. Those are my research questions. With this, my research objective, I have mainly I have the primary objectives and secondary objectives. So with my primary objective was analyze the Sri Lankan Army Infantry Battalion military preparedness to combat extremism and identify the areas which should be improved in terms of military preparedness of the infantry battalions, and propose suggestions and recommendations to the Sri Lanka Army Infantry Battalions how we can mitigate these issues. I wanted to identify. With my secondary objectives was to identify why extremism is considered as a non-traditional security threat, and understand why extremism is a threat to Sri Lanka and what is combat extremism, and analyze how combating extremism in other countries influence into Sri Lanka, because we are island nation. We have many imaginary threats from various in everywhere, so that we must analyze how combat extremism in other countries influence Sri Lanka. With this, I am moving to my literature reviews. In the violent extremism, according to the Australian National Counter-Terrorism Framework, the definition of the violent extremism, they are mentioning that the willingness of the use of support the use of violence to further particular beliefs, including those of a political ideology or social nature. This may include acts of terrorism. It is how the extremism is defined, and we'll move to the how the terrorism have defined by the Australian Criminal Code. So, in an action in threat of action that causes serious physical harm of or death to person, or endanger a person life, or involve serious risk to public health or safety, serious damage to public property, or serious interference with essential electronic systems, it has mentioned in the definition of the terrorism. So that the linkage between the terrorism and the extremism, I have identified some certain the human life. It is always threatened to the human life. Violent extremism, homicide, genocide, fratricide, and it can be the develop as the terrorism work. So with this, for my research, I have selected the
Major, you have 1
population.
minute. 1 more minute to wrap up.
Okay, right. So with this time constraint, I am directly moving to my recommendations, and mainly by considering the preparedness level of the infantry battalion, my first recommendation was invest in sophisticated weaponry and technology to the Sri Lanka Army infantry battalions. The extensive training of the Sri Lanka Army infantry officers and the soldiers, it is must, because now the outdated training model is not sufficient enough to face the huge extremist threat. And development of the doctrine is essential, because presently Sri Lanka Army is lagging behind the doctrine. We don't have the a specific doctrine for the, especially the counter-insurgency operations. So military doctrine is always express how military forces contribute to any military involvement, including campaign, major operation, battle and engagement. It is showing how what is our mission and how the service, how what we have to do, how the mission has been carried out by history, and how the mission is to be carried out. It is mentioned in the doctrine. So we must have our own doctrine for counter-insurgency operation, because presently we are following the British doctrine. It is the geographical platform is differ, so that we must have our own doctrine. And intelligence collaboration is very much important. So because our intelligence agencies have the ego issue. I have identified during my research. We have the
Major, you
ego
do
issues.
wrap it up. We are really behind time.
Yeah.
So
And collaboration and other countries and in screening the military personnel. And thank you very much. These are my recommendations. Thank you very much, sir. Have given me this opportunity to present my presentation. Thank you, sir.
thank you, Major Gunasinghe. So with the end of that presentation, we come to the end of all the presentations for this particular theme. So we have about 15 minutes time left for Q&A. So you can either make a brief comment or ask a question, very clear, concise question to any of the panelists. So you have 15 minutes. Yes.
Thank you very much. In fact, I was delighted to hear each panelist, which is highly focused on this CVE and the countermeasures. So, and of course, the most of the panel had pointed out about the global phenomenon and how we can take lessons from the Sri Lankan perspective in that regard. I may ask each of any panel could answer. So when I listened to the Mr. Asif presentation on this regard, what he pointed out, the issues that had been highlighted can be either full or push factors in line with the expulsion of the Muslim community in the north, in line with LTT terrorism, and again, the BBS as a counterproduct, whatever the discourse, no issues. But when we see the particular incident that each Sunday attack, which I see, of course, it's not really a violent extremism idea, it's something terrorism act, which not really target either Tamil population or either BBS population. So that means it's obviously connected to the Islamic State. So something that we are surprised, it came from nowhere. So in that regard, from the Easter Sunday attack, or I would say the post-Easter Sunday attack, what kind of strategy that government is being taking place in line with dealing with cyberspace? So I am not really focusing on the people-to-people context or madrasas or whatever the transnational context, but basically on the cyber domain, which is really paramount in this regard. Thank you.
So we'll, Asif, you can prepare for that. We'll take a few more questions and then we'll go to the panelists.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So good evening. I'm Colonel Rukshan Kannangal. So I heard I listened all the submitters who have presenters who have present the first three. I'm talking about the first three topics which delivered by the presenters. The one was the recruitment rhetoric and was by Professor Praveen Abeyratne, and the drivers of Islamic extremism in Sri Lanka, A. Fahood, and rethinking the Sri Lankan approach of countering Islamist violent extremism, and by Sindhuja, and because I heard these three speakers now since inception of 1976, the inception of LTT, and we had prolonged conflict because due to non-address those issues at initial stage. So we had to fight for 30 years and we end up 2009. So after that, when considering coming to this Islamic extremism, these all conflicts, I felt all conflicts are prolonged and dragging due to few factors. One is the government interest, the governor's government interest towards the issue. Another one is the motive of the governors to address that issue. And other one is the prioritization which is given for the security, national security. Because of these three factors, this conflict emerged, prolonged, and terminated. Whence, during this, especially regarding Easter bombing, Easter attack. So my point is, due to negligence, due to dismantle of intelligence arms, due to less priority given for national security, those kind of, because of these factors, this situation has created and that done the damage for the country. So I heard about the speakers who narrowly brought their views and idea about these their topics they talk. But my point is, going behind this, all these speakers, the only nutshell that we can drag through to come to a solution and address to these issues for these factors which I mentioned, if having good governance and good motives, good interest, and the prioritization about the national security, those factors I think more should be addressed when considering these Islamic and whatever so you call this conflict emerge because of this thing. That's all from my side. That's just summarize. By hearing of these all speakers, I got that, because these are the lacking behind parties from Sri Lanka that we have to address this issue. Then there won't be, and even that one of speaker and he's concluded his thing. You cannot defeat tomorrow's terrorist by applying yesterday's strategies. Now, going through hearing that, even listening to that, because of the negligence and less priority of this national security, cause is to make this statement. If we are addressing in properly these these issues, we are not having this kind of crisis in future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colonel. Any other questions? Yes, there's a question there.
Good afternoon. My question goes to all the panel. As usual, if we take the head down, then all the organization will be not functioning. So as the usual method. So still the terrorist organizations are functioning after we taking the heads also. So what is the thing behind that? That means what is their motive? What is their actual what are they requiring from us? That what is the terrorism? So if we are, for an example, if we are taking that after the Baghdad is dead also, still the IS is in function. So what is the behind the scenes? What is going on?
Yeah. I think we have, you have another question there? No. Right. So shall we address these questions? So I think Asif, the first question came to you. So Asif can respond to that. The other observations, Praveen, if you have any input, you can provide the input. And so what we'll do is we'll start with Asif. We'll go to Sindhuja and we'll come back to Praveen. Asif, you can start.
Thank you, sir. So to address the first question, what steps the government should take or what measures the state should adopt in order to to counter this form of Islamist extremism, we need to keep in mind that Islamist extremism over the years has been constantly evolving. So it has been an evolutionary process. So in the current situation with the advancement of end-to-end encrypted communication technology, advancements in social media, violent extremists have been able to exploit social media and communications tools to radicalize and recruit combatants. So one of the key strategies in countering Islamist extremism is to have a comprehensive strategy to counter it within the online domains. So there is a phenomenon where lone wolf type attackers and inspired networks have emerged over the years. So in order to address this issue of lone wolf type attackers and inspired networks who are influenced primarily through social media platforms and through WhatsApp, Facebook, and Twitter, there needs to be some form of counter messaging strategy in order to address these things. And also, apart from addressing them within the online space or the cyber space, there needs to also be a proper mechanism to address the root causes or the drivers of violent extremism. So over a period of time, some of these drivers or root causes of Islamist extremism, most of the strategists or academics or scholars have not identified or understood it, or there is a situation where the state has not acted upon following identifying such drivers. So there needs to be a proper strategy in order to counter the extremist ideology, because the objective is to ensure that non-combatants remain as non-combatants, because we are seeing a trend where violent extremist non-combatants are rapidly evolving into lone wolf type attackers or inspired networks, as we've seen over the period of years. And also I would like to draw reference to a particular operation some of the US troops had carried out in Mosul. They had uncovered a document of Baghdadi, which he specifically mentioned that well-conceived media missile is more effective than certain military campaigns. So that goes to establish the fact that their strategic communication campaigns have been playing a key role in strengthening groups such as ISIS.
Thank you, Asif.
Thanks, sir.
Sindhuja?
Yeah, answering to the question related to the headhunting phenomena, yes, definitely it's not it's not sufficient right at the moment, because what drives the individuals right at the moment to become radicalized is the ideology that the Salafi jihadists are mounting. So that's why in my presentation also I emphasized saying that hand in hand, like there should be, the strategy should incorporate population-centric approaches as well as enemy-centric approaches, winning hearts and minds of the population. So when you look at the South Asian context right at the moment, most of the people get stimulated by a certain amount of online material. And right now there is a magazine by ISIS called Voice of Al-Hind or Voice of Hind or Swat al-Hind, which actually promotes the ISIS ideology in the Indian subcontinent. And this is coming not from Tamil language but from English. So it actually can be read by all the people or potential radical individuals in the region to make themselves, flown towards Islamic radicalization. And if I'm to actually give you certain amount of understanding about the phenomena right now, is right now there has been a very recently, I think 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, there has been an incident in India where a group of 9 people were arrested based on the linkages to the ideological linkages to Al-Qaeda, and they were about to actually mount an attack in couple of places in India. So when you look at how they have got into such phenomena is by couple of people, a particular radicalized element from Pakistan has driven them through social media to mount that attack or to launch certain attacks in Indian periphery. And also, when you look at the incidents which took place in Afghanistan very recently, there has been a attack by a couple of Indians who have actually cross-bordered to Afghanistan and actually done a prison raid and made nearly 270 prisoners out of that jail in Jalalabad. So you see that, ideology of the ISIS right now actually playing a key role rather than particular individuals coming and making more and more radicals in the current context. So therefore, the ideology, if you are to counter the ideology, there are certain strategies that you have to implement, but then definitely you might have to go through disengagement and de-radicalization both hand in hand. So in strategy-wise, the government might have to look at both the aspects dealing with Islamist extremism, particularly in Sri Lanka, implementing both the phenomena at the same time, but not only to the Islamist extremists, but also to the majority as well, because that there is a relationship between the majority and the minority, how they actually share this radicalization process. That's what I actually showed in that cycle of resistance chart as well. So I think I answered your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sindhuja. Praveen?
Thank you, Dr. Dahe. If I can build on what Ms. Asif said, two aspects. One is the virtual world, and the other one is the root causes of terrorism. What I'm trying to show through my research and this paper is that the information operations of the Salaf Jihadi organizations are extremely advanced, sophisticated, and adaptive. The virtual world is something that the technology is adaptive, innovative, and basically there is very little that a state can do. You can see the United States and other Western countries really struggling to fight what's happening in social media and through information technology. That's not where the answer lies. The answer lies, as where Asif said, in addressing the root causes of terrorism. And to put it in a nutshell, it's to do with discrimination, marginalization, and the structural context of which you find individuals having a reason to be drawn towards the ideology. So that is what has to be addressed. That's a long-term effort, and it can be addressed, as I think one of the audience mentioned, through good governance.
Thank you, Praveen. We have a little bit time, if we can, squeeze. If there is any last questions, feedback, it's open. Yeah.
I had to make him run. Sorry. This question is to Sindhuja. You were talking about the periphery and the core, but I don't think you really got a lot of time to explain that. So my question is, how going forward, because you're talking about Sri Lanka, how do you think the issues faced in the periphery would affect the core in the long run? We do see certain side effects, perhaps, of what's going on, but how do you think the projection to the future, how do you see it, foresee?
When you look at the future phenomena of extremism in the region, what I see right at the moment is the ideology driving people forward. As I mentioned, there are a couple of very interesting online magazines and online material being disseminated. And also, there are a couple of, you see that in social media that people are getting connected from different parts of the world and trying to build up a kind of a platform, bringing the aspect of the caliphate forward, rather than you brand it in the name of Islamic State or Al-Qaeda or, for that matter, Boko Haram. So this phenomena of the caliphate is now being pushed forward, rather than people actually come in and saying, I belong to ISIS, I pledge to ISIS, or I pledge to Al-Qaeda. So this is a bit of a problem, because when you pledge allegiance to an organization from the security perception or security apparatus perception, it's very easy for you to deal with it. You can just go and arrest the person because he has pledged to a terrorist group. But people who disseminate an ideology like caliphate and driving people towards radicalization, it's very difficult to justify and take them, or to take them under custody and say that you're a terrorist, because from their perception, it's their point of view. And this is something that most of the countries right now are facing from the security perception. From the other side, when it comes to the social media, you see people connecting from India, Sri Lanka, then Sri Lanka to maybe Maldives. So the social media phenomena is a bit of a problem, because even if you have an operation based on social media, countering individuals, like persona-based operations, you will see that one platform will only run for certain amount of period, and after that they change the whole platform, but still they will have the individuals moved into that platform. But still then when we want to actually get in, still we have a problem, especially in terms of persona handling. And because of that, this whole phenomena has become a little bit difficult from the perception of security apparatus. But having said that, in the region, what we see is that lots of people moving from one territory to sometimes to another territory, as I mentioned, from Kerala to Afghanistan maybe, or from India to Bangladesh, Bangladesh to somewhere else. But in Sri Lanka, you don't see that phenomena. But when you look at the Easter Sunday attack, you see that couple of people, or I would particularly say one individual, we saw that he has gone to Syria and has obtained the training and coming back to Sri Lanka and mounting certain amount of violent extremist activities. So having said that, that shows that sleepers are there. So because he has gone in 2014 and has come back and stayed for a couple of years and has got involved in the incident. So you see that, sleeper cells, you see sleeper individuals, and luckily we have not seen an element of, or we have not seen a trend of lone wolf attacks coming up inside the country, but still you have that threat mounting because the region is affected and people are, driving themselves towards that direction as well. And also, a very interesting phenomena is the women radicalization, which we have not come across, or we have not seen it in that perception until the Easter Sunday attack. But when you dig in deep, you see that women are also getting radicalized in the region, which will actually, through social media, they might have connections. So in future, you will actually see that also coming up. Then the radicalization aspect in madrasas. the material which is actually been given to students and how preaching has been done, and some of the madrasas are not registered. So these type of problems are there in the core, which actually connects to the periphery, because the periphery is anyway affected. So it's easy for the peripheral aspect to come into the Sri Lankan aspect when the people are becoming more and more vulnerable due to the ideological phenomena. So all these factors will ultimately have a security problem.
Right, thank you, Ms. Jayaratna. I think we are now a bit short of time and we have to give the space back. So let me quickly summarize. Not summarize, I think the summarization is already done. But let me quickly highlight a couple of points from this conversation. And given the nature of the questions, I think what we need to understand is the fact that there are two things. Two very interesting terms. Some people like it, some people don't. So the fact is that the time we are moving into two things. We are moving into a more complex world, and we call this complexity. And it's a complex argument. That's the point. I mean, the second thing is, with complexity comes what we call systematic crises. Systematic crisis is when the world faces issues such as extremism, such as COVID. It has multiple effects on all other spheres of life. That is, it knocks down other systems. That's why we are even discussing. And sometimes the biggest problem is, from the questions you saw, there is no real easy answer. And there is a question about cutting the head off. So the easy answer is, we should stop thinking of these crises in the terms that we are comfortable with. We should stop seeing that the analogies we build is the problem. We always saw terrorism in analogous to something human or something live. So whatever is live, when the head is cut off, it dies. That's what we were thinking. But we are wrong, right? That's why some people try to call it a hydra. Hydra in both sense. Hydra in a Greek sense, hydra in a scientific sense. In scientific sense, the hydra is a microsome that doesn't die at all. Scientists are still baffled. In a Greek mythological sense, it's about a 9-headed monster, and you don't know which head to cut, right? So I think the issue is, one of the strategic problems of our time is the way we strategize problems in the 20th century is not helping us to look at problems in the 21st century, right? Those frames are failing us. But the problem is, we are also struggling to come up with things. Now, even the idea of co-periphery is a very interesting idea, but it comes from a 20th century thinking, which is the world systems theory. World systems theory was a way of looking at the world as a core and as a periphery. So now we are applying that into all other studies. Some of it makes sense. I'm not saying it's wrong, but we are still trying to use these frameworks. Some of it works. It helps us to explain. But sometimes it's very difficult for us to explain. That's why strategically countries are falling back, and that is why strategically adversaries are moving ahead. Because nation states are made to think in strategic frameworks like we do. But sometimes the problem is, the challenges we face they're not thinking in that frames, right? So since that is why 9/11, if you look at the global crisis of now, 9/11 was the starting point. And then 7 years on, the global economic crisis. Both of them, the rational humans didn't expect. We were all seeing terrorism, but we didn't see terrorism in that form. We were expecting financial crisis. We didn't expect financial crisis in that form. So that is continuing. So as researchers, as students, as interest parties of these subjects, we need to understand how these complexities of the 21st century, as well as the systematic crises of the 20th century, they are shaking, all of our thinking. So ours is not to say we can't. That is, we have to always then think through those systems. You have to think through the crisis. Sometimes that's why you need to, if you want to defeat extremism, you probably want to think like extremists. Yeah, that's what we are not doing. We are looking at extremists from our own rational points of view and saying, hey, you are extremist, this is how I would deal with it. The extremist would say, well, that's why it's not working. So with all those things, panels like this always leaves us more with questions rather than answers. But that's the whole point of education and deliberation and critical thinking. The more the questions you have in your mind, more you will think of answers and more you will move towards it. So I will once again, I want to thank the KDU. I want to thank the organizing committee. I want to thank Brigadier Rajapaksa, who's diligently been supporting us, who's been, he's academic himself, so he has a lot of ideas, so it's, I think, very difficult to keep quiet also at sometimes. So I should thank all the panelists who joined us physically and virtually. And thank you for all the questions. So have a great evening. We have one more session left, so we can go for a break and come back. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, that marks the end of the third technical session of the 13th International Research Conference of General Sir John Kotharavala Defence University. It is our belief that each and every one of you gained much knowledge as we shared interesting and intellectual thoughts about extremism as a national threat. Ladies and gentlemen, please give another round of applause for the chair and the speakers for this session for their valuable input here today. Thank you, sir. It is time to recognize the valuable contribution of knowledge and intellect provided by the guest speakers here today. In order to present the tokens of appreciation on behalf of General Sir John Kotharavala Defence University, I humbly invite Brigadier R.G.U. Rajapaksha, the Dean, Faculty of Graduate Studies, to the stage. To receive the tokens of appreciation, let me cordially invite Honorable Chair for today's technical session, Dr. Harendra Vidanage. And Ms. S.U.W. Jayaratna. Thank you, sir. That marks the end of the third technical session of the 13th International Research Conference 2020. Please join us for the next technical session here at the main auditorium of the Faculty of Graduate Studies. Thank you and have a good day.